Okay, Kathy, I got a phone call and it stopped my recording, so I had gone on and painted a whole nother card and it wasn't recording, so I'm going to try to pick up maybe here so that you can see. But if you can see, I painted one card without the lines, and I think I was beginning on that one before the video stopped. Then I went ahead and did one with the lines first, and I had talked about how as you're painting along, you want to let your paint dry so that you don't become muddy. And if you let it dry, then you can do layers of paint that creates a lovely effect, and also alters your colors. That's one way of creating your colors, just through layering. I also talked a little bit about the resources that I use. I'm a kind of a visual person, and so there's always nice to have your mind motivated. So you can go to, often I'll Google something, so I'll see images of something I might want to use in my painting, or references that way, or magazines. And I think that was a part that was missed. I also talked about the paper that I use, and I'm not sure if you can see this, but it's a Strathmore watercolor paper, and it is what I paint my cards on. It's a decent type of paper, but it's not the best. And when you have good paper, you can really tell as you're painting how fine your paper is. Strathmore is only in the middle. There's a lot of things you can't create, and the effects aren't the same until you get on a more quality paper. I kind of showed you, I have a roll of Arches paper, which is a French paper, and by far my favorite paper. A little more expensive. I haven't found it in cards yet, but you can actually kind of rework your work a little bit on watercolors if your paper's good. If your paper's the quality that I do on my cards, you kind of get one chance, and you can't really remedy a lot of your work if you want to do that. So if it gets muddied, you're kind of sunk. Then you just need to start over. Where if your paper's really quality and really good, you can kind of rework it sometimes. Trying to think what else. I think on the first part of the video, I think I talked about my papers are dry, and I'm using I'm not sure exactly where we got now. I talked about my paints. I wasn't mixing my paints on a palette. This time I was just using my brush to create the paper. So I'm going to just continue creating on, so I talked about I was mixing more on my cards than on a palette before I painted. And so I'm going to go to this card that doesn't have the lines on it, and just continue a little bit more working on maybe the greenery a little bit more. The card is dry now, the color that's already on it, so it allows me to continue and add on top of anything that's there, or add to it. And at this point, I think I have this interesting brush, and I cannot remember what it's called, but I don't know if you can see, it's kind of a triangle shape, but it has a very lovely point on it, and these are sable brushes, so it's just a really nice brush. I like it when I'm going to paint larger areas, because it really spreads the paint nicely. So what I'm going to do here is the card that you liked, and I'm going back to this one. I'm just going to try to bring some background onto the cards, and you can see how easily this brush can kind of do that. And I'm going to maybe bring a little bit of a darker color there, and see this is bleeding out. You see how that kind of does. Kind of think I will perhaps let this dry. And then I think on this one I'm going to let it dry and then decide, but I think I'm going to come back in and put the lines after. When I think when the recording stopped, I think I had talked about how if you're putting the lines after, sometimes that's a nice effect because you don't, the color doesn't confine you. You can make your lines and then it's quite artistic where the color isn't just filled in like a coloring book. I do like that one aspect of doing my lines after. I think I maybe talked about how most of my work is just organic. It kind of evolves as I go. And so I don't always have the idea, the completed idea in my mind. And I quite like that approach because I really like the looseness of that. Here I'm just adding a little bit of background to these flowers too, and we'll just see if we can't work with both of them. So I think actually I can work on the blooms a little bit because they are dry and I'm not sure that they're exactly how I wanted, so I'm gonna try to So one thing that I always do with my art, and I've done for years, and I think it's something probably that I learned years ago, and that is any image has lots and lots of colors in it. Even though you'll look at a green leaf and you think, oh, I'm going to paint that green because that looks green. It's really a combination of greens and maybe reds and oranges, and so I'm never afraid to add color, perhaps like some purple down in my leaves or some red or a color that you wouldn't naturally think goes there, but what it does is it enhances the picture. And so I'm never afraid. I'm always like to use color. I don't know if you can see on this one, but see there's kind of a pink. I've used a pink in here in the background. So that's something I can still add to the others because it would be something that would be added after they're dry. Okay, this one I'm going to come back and I'm going to add the lines maybe to bring out some of the color. I think the film went to the point where I talked about that I like loose images, and if I create with the paint or with my pen and I move quickly with it, it's usually a lot looser and more, in my mind, artistic than if I am trying to be precise and have all circles or all petal shapes, and because really I think it's much more interesting if perfection is not part of my picture. So I don't know if you can see how kind of matching up a little bit of the shape that I've painted on here, but not exactly. And see, I like those, they're kind of loose. And now this is kind of wet, so I don't really want to add my pencil or pen marks to it yet, but top of the stem I can. Now I've got, and I think I talked about numbers. I like odd numbers versus even numbers, or asymmetrical versus symmetrical, and that's a personal choice, but I do think it's a little more artistic if you work with the even numbers versus the odd number. Work with the odd numbers rather than the even numbers. And again, I think it's just an artistic look. This paper is really a little more wet than I want it, but I thought I might give a little depth by creating perhaps some of the leaves. And I can also use my pen to bring out some of these leaves. And so I've got 4 bloom shapes, and I like the odd number, so I'm going to come in and I'm going to maybe just add, actually I'm going to add 3 little where the flowers are still in their kind of pod shape, but they will eventually bloom. I'm just going to add those. So now we've got 7 sites of color that your eye will go to 7 versus just staying with these 4. I'm going to have to let this dry for a minute before I start adding. Actually, I think I can do a little bit more orange on this guy. And the first one I think we talked about, marigolds have a variety of shapes and a variety of colors, and so you aren't restricted to just orange or just yellow on a marigold. Sometimes a dark